Okay, so in my previous video, I covered the main hardware reasons for switching to the iPhone 13 Pro after a decade of using Android phones. If you haven't already, make sure to check that video out in the description below. In this video, I wanted to cover in late 2021, almost 2022 now, my experience of switching to iOS and what it has been like in comparison to Android, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So firstly, let's touch upon the experience of trying to migrate everything from Android to iOS. In one word, frustrating. Okay, let me explain. Initially, Apple makes it seem like the experience of switching is seamless, and it's just not. For me, I was unable to transfer any of my files or apps using the Move to iOS app. This app would constantly freeze after entering the verification code, and this was following me patiently waiting hours on end with multiple attempts using different combinations of selected things I wanted to transfer. Even transferring contacts by itself was just not doable. In the end, I succumbed to the inevitable and I began the tedious process of setting up the iPhone from scratch. This, to be fair, is completely doable. It just takes time. The one thing I found incredibly frustrating was that to transfer both my SMS and WhatsApp messages, I had to download a paid third-party application. No one wants to pay $1,800 on an iPhone to then have to pay an additional $30 for software that's only purpose is to transfer your WhatsApp messages. It just seems completely ridiculous that Apple and Google haven't found a solution to this, and to be perfectly honest, it's a major deterrent for many people out there. No one wants to download a software and learn how to use it just so that they can retain their messages from one device to another, let alone pay for that experience. But okay, with migration aside, let's move on to the more positive aspects of iOS. Without a doubt, the greatest benefit I've seen with iOS is its integration with Apple's ecosystem. Just be wary that you have to be reasonably invested in other Apple products to be able to get a similar experience to what I am about to mention. Firstly, AirDrop. It is so convenient. I have had little tasters of using AirDrop between my iPad and my MacBook, but this has expanded exponentially with the inclusion of an iPhone into the mix. AirDrop allows me to effortlessly transfer videos, photos, documents, and any other file to and from my Apple devices. Just to emphasize the point, for my recent review of the iPhone 13 Pro, I was able to easily transfer videos and photos taken by the iPhone to the MacBook and incorporate them in my Final Cut Pro footage. I can foresee in the future doing the same if I were to make, say, traveling videos of the sort with my iPhone 13 Pro, allowing me to edit said media on a larger Apple device. Another great example of how beneficial it has been to have AirDrop was just recently my mechanical keyboard developed a fault with one of its keys, and to troubleshoot, the online store I purchased from wanted a photo. Within 30 seconds, I had taken the photo, transferred it to my MacBook, and uploaded it into their online form. Easy. Another benefit of the Apple ecosystem is that I can answer calls and send and receive iMessage on my MacBook. Realistically speaking, I'm often not without my phone, but there has been a couple of occasions where I've answered calls or sent messages through my MacBook because my phone was somewhere else in the house, and it has worked flawlessly. Additionally, your library of known Wi-Fi networks, Bluetooth Apple devices, passwords, Apple Pay cards, and notes are also shared across all devices. This makes life just that little bit easier. Speaking of which, I absolutely love the fact that my MacBook and iPad detect that my iPhone is nearby when I'm not connected to Wi-Fi. A little pop-up comes up prompting me to tether Wi-Fi from my iPhone, and all I do is press connect. Way easier than on Android, where I would have to go into the settings to turn on Wi-Fi tethering and then connect it to my device. Finally, the Find My app is by far the easiest way for me to keep track of the location of my devices, and something that was just non-existent for my Android phone. All of these features are of course nowhere near as useful as AirDrop, but they do improve the overall experience and will certainly be missed if I ever do decide to switch back to Android. There's a number of other positive aspects I found moving from Android to iOS that aren't entirely reliant on the ecosystem alone. For example, I quite like Apple's way of managing passwords and Apple Pay, as both are only accessible through the use of biometrics. On Android, passwords just autofill without need for any authentication, which is definitely not the safest option. I also really like reachability. It's easy to activate, works reliably, and allows me to use the phone with one hand. Something that I could never do on my OnePlus 7 Pro, which still to this day does not have a one-handed mode. In comparison to the Samsung's 21, I do find Apple's implementation to be the better, as it still utilizes the whole width of the phone, thereby making touch targets not too small. The file system on iOS now is also reasonable. Sure, you don't have that flexibility of storing applications or accessing the system files, but it's more than enough for downloading and storing documents, images, and videos, which is all that I need it for. Focus modes on the new iOS 15 are handy for studying and sleep, and like a lot of features in iOS, are able to be synced across all of your Apple devices. Now, speaking of other broader quality of life improvements on the iPhone, I have to say that the app ecosystem is quite vast in iOS, and apps are overall more well optimized. For example, Instagram natively shoots from the original camera on the iPhone, whereas for a lot of other Android phones, the video and photos taken through the app suffer substantial image quality degradation. Okay, so now let's talk about the negatives. When it comes to using iOS, one of the major gripes that I have is, of course, the lack of customizability. To be fair, Apple has improved this quite a bit in more recent versions of iOS. For example, the inclusion of widgets allows you to add a bit more flair and personality to your home screen, and Smart Stacks is a really clever way of allowing you to have multiple pages of information integrated into one widget. Another recent iOS change that made the transition from Android a little easier is the app library. It's not exactly like Android's app library, which simply lists all apps in a separate UI page. It instead collates all the apps into little app groups. This can be somewhat annoying as it requires you to tap multiple times to find an app that, for example, you don't often use. But if you don't often use it, then a couple of taps generally is not a big deal. Plus, you can always search for the app. However, one of the major gripes I have in terms of customizability is the inability for me to move my icons freely around. It's super annoying, especially when the icons are quite large in iOS to begin with, and therefore they cover a lot of your wallpaper or background. Speaking of which, if you'd like to make your own custom icons, as well as things like transparent widgets, which are actually not that readily available from the native widgets, it's a pretty convoluted process. It is doable. In Android, however, the process is much more simple, just requiring you to download a free or paid icon or widget pack and applying it directly through the settings menu. And there's no need to set up individual icons for each app like in iOS. Other stubborn things that I cannot customize in iOS include the physical buttons. It would be so nice for me to be able to double-click the power button for the camera app like in Android, as I find it's more intuitive than the shortcut on the lock screen in iOS, as I can activate it anywhere in the system UI. Now, I also want to mention that in Android, you have that ability to also download custom APKs or even root your phone for that next level of customizability. But those things are generally out of my area of interest. And ultimately, for the average consumer, Android still offers a more vast but more flexible and easy to use experience when it comes to making the device look and act as your own. The other gripe I have with iOS ever since switching to the iPhone is the phone app. It's just so absurd to think after so many years, Apple still hasn't included T9 dialing into the phone app. For those of you that hasn't experienced T9 on an Android phone, you can use the keypad to search for your desired contact without actually going into the separate contacts tab, unlike on an iPhone. It's a massive inconvenience not having this on the iPhone, and again, it's incredible to think that this still hasn't been implemented into iOS yet. Whilst notifications in iOS have improved substantially, the lack of notification icons due to the notch being present is pretty annoying, and there have been times where I've missed certain messages or emails because they get buried into grouping notifications which would only display the most recent message or email. Additionally, I haven't really gotten used to the swiping up on the lock screen to access my notifications and wish there was a setting that will allow you to just automatically display the feed without that gesture like on Android. The lack of an always-on display is also something that is sorely missed on my iPhone. It was always quite a handy feature to have on my Android phones, allowing for me to quickly glance for any new important notifications or the time and date. Given the iPhone Pros have OLED displays, I think it really should be a feature implemented in the next iteration of iOS. And whilst we're here, it should also be mentioned that there is no split screen mode, so it's not possible for you to use two apps at once with an iPhone. As someone who is guilty of playing YouTube on my phone whilst I browse the web, not being able to do this on the iPhone has been, admittedly, a bit of a shock to the system, even if it's probably for the better. And I can't go without saying how frustrating Face ID is in comparison to a fingerprint sensor. I know it's not really an iOS software thing, but no current generation iPhones have Touch ID. I don't care if it's not built into the display like my previous Android phones, but even if Apple just included it on the power button on the side like the iPad Air, I would be a very happy camper. I have to wear a mask a lot at work. So there are just too many situations where I'm caught having to input my PIN code, which personally I think is one of the least safe ways of unlocking my iPhone. Now that I've got all that off my chest, let's talk about some of the things that I thought may have been resolved going into iOS, but ended up becoming just as problematic as what they were in Android, if not more. Firstly is bugs. Weirdly, I thought that given Apple's tightly knit network of products that optimization for bugs would be substantially better. Alas, I still get the occasional hiccup here and there. For some applications, whilst frustrating as it is, the issues are generally dependent on the developer to fix. For example, Gmail does not allow me to open PDFs from my Hotmail account. For other native applications, I am not so understanding. One of the really nice features that I thought would be so good to have moving to iOS was the automated switching of AirPods between devices. I mean, I love the multi-device support on my Bose QC30 device, and if you want, check out my review in the description below. But when I found out about Apple's automated switching, it seemed to be a really good alternative. Unfortunately, I continuously have issues switching the connections between my MacBook and my iPhone. This mainly occurs when trying to play something on my Mac from the iPhone. The audio defaults to the main speakers, and on reconnecting, no audio is heard through either the AirPods or speakers. Changing the noise cancellation options just results in the audio playing through the speakers itself. It's incredibly frustrating, and it just makes the whole option of just manually connecting between devices on an Android phone a more appealing one. Other in-house bugs that I have come across includes AirDrop every now and then not working, and for some reason I cannot get my contacts to sync between my Mac and my iPhone despite having an up-to-date iCloud. Speaking of iCloud, the relatively low capacity offered in it, as well as Google Drive for that matter, is another thing that I have a personal gripe about, as it seems more and more nowadays that you have to be committed to paying a monthly fee to have even compressed files stored on the cloud. The final other thing that I will mention is admittedly very minor, and I wouldn't even call it a problem, but between both Android and iOS, I still will occasionally experience, once in a blue moon, a little stutter or freeze. Again, for some reason, I thought that this would not happen on such an optimized platform as iOS, but I think again, it probably has something to do with apps more so than iOS or Android for that matter. And just to be clear, this rarely happens on either platform, so really, it's nothing to worry about. Okay, so I hope you guys like this video. I found that the whole process of moving all my apps, contacts, messages, photos, etc. from Android to iOS, probably the most frustrating experience of everything. But otherwise, once I was set up, it was a fairly uneventful transition. Sure, I complain about the limitations of iOS in terms of customizability and some really overdue features. But looking at the whole picture, I think that both platforms offer a similar level of advantages and disadvantages to us consumers. For me, the disadvantages of both sides aren't really deal breakers, so I can very easily see myself using either platform. It just depends on what your needs are as to which one you should go with. But if you think like me that you could utilize both, then really the choice comes down to hardware and price. That's the big decision that I need to make now. Do I want to absorb that exorbitant price of the iPhone 13 Pro for its admittedly excellent camera performance and battery life? Or do I want to save a bit of money and have a similar experience with a flagship Android phone like the S21? Let me know what your thoughts are. Are you open to the idea of switching between platforms? Or are you set on just one? If so, which one and why? I'd love to hear all your opinions, so make sure to comment down below, and whilst you're there, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe for more videos to come. But until the next one, see ya.